Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 1. The Republicans call it the Low Energy Cost Act, but in fact it does the opposite, and it puts polluters over people. So we call it the Polluters Over People Act, and that's justified because that's exactly what it does. This bill is nothing more than a grab bag of big oil giveaways and loopholes that endanger the health, safety, and security of Americans. It does absolutely nothing to lower energy costs for American families. In fact, it will actually drive up costs while doubling down on costly fossil fuels. Now, does the GOP really believe that big oil cares about Americans? During the COVID crisis in the last 3 years, we had a hearing where we brought in some of the large American oil companies, or large oil companies, I should say. And it was quite clear that they wanted to keep prices high. It was quite clear that they were benefiting from OPEC and the fact that Russia had invaded Ukraine and that oil supplies had become more limited because of that invasion of Ukraine, and that as a result, prices for oil and gasoline were going up. They didn't care. They liked it. We actually asked them at the hearing whether or not they would increase production because they have so many leases on federal lands that they don't use. And they said no. They said, well, maybe eventually we would do that, but we haven't gotten around to it yet. I don't think they still have gotten around to it. And so this notion that somehow by benefiting big oil, you know, the major American so-called oil companies, that this is going to help the American people, that's not their goal. Last year, Big Oil's profits in 2022 were $451 billion, a record high. The dividends they gave out and the stock buyouts amounted to $163 billion. They only care about the stockholders. They don't care about the price of gasoline. They want it to stay high. They don't care about whether Americans can afford gasoline. And, you know, my chair, Rogers, who you know, I really respect a lot, talked about LNG. One of the things in this bill is it removes the requirement, and I'm going to talk about other things that it does, but it removes the requirement that liquefied natural gas exports be determined to be in the public interest before being sent overseas. Well, that's going to lead to more American LNG being sent to our adversaries, including China. This helps China. This doesn't hurt China. This helps China. And we know that when there was a time a few years ago when LNG exports were limited because of, I think it was some, I forget what caused it. And during that period of time, the evidence shows the price for American, you know, for gasoline or for American crude was actually going down. Because when you send LNG overseas, it's not available here in the United States. And that actually lowers gas prices when you have more gasoline available or more refineries available to process gasoline here in the United States. So, you know, I just want to debunk this idea that somehow this bill is going to lower prices here, that somehow benefiting big oil helps Americans, that somehow exporting more LNG hurts China. These things are simply not the case, and the evidence proves very much to the contrary. Now, this bill, H.R. 1, I'll call it the Polluters Over People Act, rescinds several transformational climate programs that the Democrats enacted as part of the Inflation Reduction Act last year. What I'm trying to get across today is that at the same time that they're helping big oil, not driving down prices and helping China, the Republicans are also tearing down all the environmental laws that we've had for the last 50 years and putting all the emphasis on fossil fuels rather than clean energy. The bottom line is the only way that we're going to lower costs is by encouraging clean energy. Yes, I agree with Chairwoman Rogers that the United States has to be a bigger energy producer. But the future for that is with clean energy, not with pumping more oil and gas. It's by encouraging clean energy, because that's where we can be the big producer. That's where the future is. That's where we can outcompete with the rest of the world. So what does this bill do? It foolishly repeals the $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund, which invests in high-impact projects that reduce pollution, create good-paying clean energy jobs, and improve public health. They obviously do not want to do anything for clean energy. It also repeals the methane emissions reduction program, which protects the health of our communities and ensures that polluters, not taxpayers or customers, pay for wasted methane. Now, let me use that as an example, because I want everyone to understand that when we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and we were trying to cut back on greenhouse gases, which, lead to global climate problems and increase global warming, we worked hard to deal with those industries here that could be affected. And the Methane Emissions Reduction Act is a perfect example of that. We worked with the independent oil producers because they said, well, if you cause the methane that's wasted now and that goes into the atmosphere and causes this increased number of greenhouse gases, if you work with us, we can accomplish capturing this methane, and then it can be recycled. But we need some money to accomplish that. So we provided them with a fund so they could make that transition. We also said that if it took them time to get a permit to capture the gas and provide a recycling program for the methane, that they would not be penalized by doing that. So this has been characterized at the GOP as some sort of tax or fee on the industry. But it's really a penalty if they don't do what's necessary to capture methane and avoid it being going into the atmosphere. And the same is true for almost every provision that they seek to repeal here. These are provisions that try to protect the public health, reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but at the same time don't have a negative impact on those industries that are hiring people and that create jobs, and at the same time try to move towards new clean energy things like wind and solar and more hydropower and other things that actually do create more jobs, as we have proven that they have. So many other things are repealed. I won't go through all of them, because I know that we have other speakers. But the bill also repeals the popular home electrification rebates that are specifically designed to lower energy bills for American families. And these are popular incentives that will save families money and are urgently needed to help us fight the climate crisis. So Republicans are rejecting all these things that help people save money, help reduce greenhouse gases, so they can double down on the old pro-polluter policies that they've had for years. This bill also does nothing to meaningfully address permitting reform. Its vision of permitting consists of letting polluters do whatever they want, and instead the bill becomes a sweetheart deal. So the bill, for example, doesn't include any changes to transmission policy necessary to ensure that clean energy can reach all corners of the country. Let me also give you a couple other examples. The biggest thing that they do to basically endanger all our environmental protections is they exempt so-called critical energy resources from the Clean Air Act and hazardous waste permitting requirements. So they say if we label a refinery, if we label a utility as a critical energy resource, then they don't have to follow the Clean Air Act, they don't have to follow the Clean Water Act, they don't have to follow the Hazardous Waste Act. It's a roundabout way of saying that we're just going to let all these industries do whatever they want, even though it undercuts public health protections. They do the same thing with toxic chemicals. We had a major toxic chemical bill to try to cut back on toxic chemicals that needlessly expose families and children to health risks. And they basically get rid of that by saying, oh, those facilities that are critical energy facilities don't have to worry about releasing toxic chemicals. I want to end by saying this. Democrats understand that the transition to clean energy is important. In fact, projects already underway are valued at tens of billions of dollars and have already created more than 100,000 good-paying jobs. Our Inflation Reduction Act is also estimated to create 9 million new jobs over the coming decade and reduce energy costs by an average of $1,800 per year. So what we've done in the last few years as Democrats is to try to move towards clean energy, understanding that you still have to have fossil fuels and nuclear and and other things, but understanding that the future in terms of U.S. being a major energy producer is in clean energy, not in fossil fuels. And to just wreck and put a bulldozer through all our environmental protections in order to encourage fossil fuels is just a huge mistake. It is not going to lower energy costs. It is going to make it much more difficult for us to reduce greenhouse gases and all the negative impacts of climate change. There's nothing in here, in my opinion, this bill is also going to hurt us from a national security point of view, because it does actually help China and help our adversaries rather than making it more difficult for them to compete with us. So with that, I would urge opposition to the bill and reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.